welcome back. Today is the last day of Bookmas. You have made it to day 12. I have made it to day 12. We collectively have made it through my 12 days of Bookmas, and it's very difficult for me to believe that we've been doing this for 12 days. It was a lot of work, but also it was really fun and it went by really, really fast. Thank you to everybody that watched these videos and engaged with these videos and supported me and encouraged me through it. It really means a lot. I already went on a sappy rant a couple days ago, but I just appreciate it so much, you guys. So yes, unfortunately today is the last day of Bookmas, which means depending on the time that you're actually watching this, tomorrow's Christmas Eve and the next day is Christmas. So I hope you guys have been having such a great holiday season so far, have been getting some great reads in and holiday time, and just hope you're enjoying the entire magic of the season. To wrap up Bookmas, I thought it would be really fun to do my end of the year book tag. I did a mid-year check-in book tag back in I think June or July, where I answered all these questions about the books that I had read so far, and that was really, really fun and you guys really liked it. So I thought it was only right to complete the journey with my year-end book tag. As I was going through these questions and thinking about these questions, I ended up adding a couple more categories to answer than back in my mid-year tag. Also, some of my answers have changed, which is really funny how time kind of affects how I'm feeling about certain books, but we'll get through all of that one at a time. Let's get into it. So the first question that I have on here is, how many books have you read this year so far? And what was your reading goal? So my reading goal for 2024 was 50 books, which I've only ever read 50 books in a year one time many years ago. And it was really tough for me, really difficult. I had such a hard time getting through it. I was literally finishing my 50th book, I think on New Year's Eve. That's what I was doing. And I never really thought that it would be possible for me to read that again, let alone top it. This year I have read 67 books so far, which is crazy. It doesn't feel like I've been reading that much, but this is the most books that I have read in a year by far. I think I might add a little bit of a stretch goal and try to get to an even 70 by the time New Year's rolls around. I don't know, we'll kind of see where it shakes out, but I might read a couple more books before really the year ends, but this, for all intents and purposes, is my year-end book tag. The next question is, what was my genre breakdown for the year? So out of the 67 books, I read one nonfiction book, one historical fiction book, 4 science fiction books, 9 mystery thrillers, 12 general fiction books, and I'm kind of encompassing contemporary fiction, literary fiction. There's all those little micro categories within fiction that I just didn't really want to parse out. So 12 fiction books, 19 fantasy books, and the top genre of my year was romance with 21 books. This was really interesting for me to go back and review what my check-in mid-year said, because fantasy was far and above the most genre that I had read of at that point, which totally checks out because fantasy is my favorite genre, so I usually read more of those books. Romance really came out on top this time. It was a close race, but just kind of eked its way through, and honestly, I think it's because I really let myself just enjoy romance this year, enjoy the short, cheesy palate cleansers when I need something in between maybe more heftier books. I definitely got into romance moods around October with just kind of like cozy autumn vibes, and definitely this December as I've been reading a lot of Christmas books. So that does make sense, although it was a little bit surprising to me that fantasy was in second place. Next we have my star rating breakdown. So I decided to just round up to the nearest number because I do give a lot of half ratings or decimal ratings like a 4.5 or a 3.75, and so just to kind of make it simpler, I will only be doing 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, etc. A 5-star book to me is the top of the top. It's the best books that I've read this year, and it's really the ones that I walk away from still thinking about the characters and the story and the plot and wanting to go back and read it more. It's those books that really, really stick with me. 4-star books are just the books that I really enjoyed, and I could have enjoyed them because they were such a good plot, or I loved the characters, the writing style, or the story, or just the vibes were great. My 4-star is very eclectic, and it kind of matches how I am as a mood reader. 3-star is just kind of middle of the road. It could be a mediocre book, or it's those books that have the really, really high highs and the really, really low lows, and I just don't really know where to put them based off of that. And then 2 stars were the books that I just did not really enjoy that much. 1 star, what's funny is that in my mid-year check-in, I initially said that a 1-star book would be the books that I DNF'd. I have changed my mind on that. I have a 1-star book that I did not DNF, and it fits very clearly into 1 star. And then I have a few books that I haven't rated as well. So to go through them all, I have 2 books that I did not rate. One of them is nonfiction, which I don't rate nonfiction, and one of them was a classic, and I just didn't really feel right about giving a rating to a classic just because of, in the moment, it didn't feel natural. I have one 1-star book. We'll get to that later. I have 9 books that were 2 stars, 21 books that were 3 stars, 26 books that were 4 stars, and 8 books that ended up being my 5-star books of the year. I think I was hoping for more 5 stars. It really does come down to such a specific line for me. I have to be thinking about that book so much later after finishing it for it to really constitute as a 5-star for me. So it's a smaller number than I was hoping, but there's some really good books. So moving on. Now we'll get into the questions that kind of relate to a specific book. I want to give a preface that I am not going to be talking about the plot or the synopsises that much. I'm mostly just going to go straight into talking about what I liked about the book or what I didn't like and why it is answering that particular question. So the first question is, what is a book that has been on your TBR shelf the longest? So I took this question to be a physical book that I currently own on my shelf that I have not read. What has been there the longest? And I think it is Severance. This book I read earlier this year, and I ended up picking it up because of a TBR jar prompt kind of made me do it. It has been on my shelf, I think, since 2018, which is a long time. We're talking almost 7 years ago. It was one of the first Book of the Month books that I ever got, and maybe in the moment when picking it up from Book of the Month, it sounded really interesting to me, but it just sat on my shelf forever. It sat and it sat and it sat. It looks definitely worse for wear. You can't see a ton of it, but man, this cover jacket is really faded. It's ripping, and it looks like it went through a lot just being on my shelf, and it never got read. But I finally did get around to reading it this year, which was great because it has been that book that's been sitting there just bugging me, you know? I don't want to read it. I have no interest in picking it up and actually reading it, but you've been there for so long, and I want to conquer you, and I want to move you to the read section. So the TBR jar prompt helped me with that. I didn't end up liking this book. I think it's because I'm just not really the right demographic, but it is a dystopian novel, and I definitely don't enjoy dystopian novels. They're always really dark, really hopeless. Just the general themes that are going on in them I don't gravitate to, and I generally try to avoid it just because I know how I'm gonna feel afterwards. It's honestly the same with movies. I don't really like end of the world movies, dystopian movies, just because it kind of puts me in a funk at the end of the book. I feel bad, and I feel hopeless, and I feel weighed down, and I definitely felt that way at the end of this book. And it could be the subject matter of it being dystopian. It was very odd reading it because it takes place during a pandemic that happens that, well, it causes people to turn into zombies, but it's a pandemic that's happening, and the author is describing how people now have to wear masks all the time, and they have to work from home, and they have to isolate. And this was written 2 years before 2020, so there was also that element where I was reading it like, oh, I feel really weird right now. I don't like this. This feels like it's predicting the future, and it just kind of put me in a weird spot. Didn't end up liking this overall, but I am really glad that it moved from my TBR shelf to my read shelf. The next question is the best debut novel that I read this year. This was such a hard one for me to answer because I actually have quite a few on my list, and I really want to be intentional about mostly just answering with one book per question and also not repeating. So I kind of had to be strategic on what book goes where, but I ended up putting The Ministry of Time as the best debut novel that I read. It's one of the best books that I've read this year. I think I have it ranked at my number 3 book out of everything that I read. So it is very high up on the list for me, and it just couldn't not be put as the best debut novel. And the fact that this is a debut novel is still blowing my mind to this day. It's so beautifully written. I love the story. It's kind of a time travel romance. There's a little bit of action and adventure in the end of it. It's funny. There's so many funny parts in it where I was just smiling and laughing, but also I was like crying at the end. It just felt like a really intense emotional roller coaster for me. There are a lot of themes that I connect with and subject matters that I just really appreciate how the author handled and talked about, and it just was so beautiful. I love this book so much. I know there's a lot of people that share the same sentiment towards it as I do. There's also a lot of people that are surprised by how much hype it's kind of getting, and I understand how some people wouldn't be able to relate to it or wouldn't really appreciate the writing style, and absolutely to each their own. For me though, this was a super impactful book for me this year. The next question is a fun one. It's, what is your new favorite character from the year? I really had to think about this question because I am a character reader. I read books and my level of enjoyment is most of the time tied to how much I like a character, how much development they go through, how much do they grow, how are they written. I really am a character reader. I know that there are some people that read books and their level of enjoyment is tied to the plot and they don't really care about the characters as much. That's just not me. It could be the worst plot ever. It could be no plot at all. And if the characters are really good, I will still be able to enjoy it. So this question of who's my new favorite character was tough. And as I was browsing my Goodreads and thinking back over all of the characters that I have encountered this year, I couldn't not go with Rocky from Project Hail Mary. I cannot tell you anything else about who Rocky is, because if you are wanting to read this book, that is a massive spoiler. But for those of you who know, you know it's Rocky. Next question is, what is the most surprising book that you read this year? And my answer will probably not be a surprise to a lot of people that watch my videos regularly, but it's gotta be Happy Place by Emily Henry. I actually went into this with low expectations. I went into this book kind of begrudgingly. This year I ended up reading all of Emily Henry's adult romance books just because I really wanted to rank them and be able to say what's my most favorite, least favorite, and how the other ones fall in between. And so I think this was the very last one that I read because I was just putting it off for so long because I was so convinced that I would not like it because it's a second chance romance specifically. I had also seen on the internet a lot of people are very divided about this book. They either love it or they hate it. It doesn't feel like there's a middle ground of, oh yeah, this is an easy, nice romance book that anybody can enjoy. Probably because it's not an easy, nice romance book that anybody can enjoy. Somehow, against all odds though, I ended up loving this book. And I think it's because it doesn't really feel like a classic traditional romance book, especially like all of Emily Henry's other books. It feels very different and set apart from that formula that she has been following. For one is the second chance romance, which is one of the main reasons that I definitely thought I wouldn't like it. Two though, it doesn't even really focus on the romance itself that much between the two main characters. It's really focusing on what the characters have been through over the last couple of years, what led them to a breaking point of having to end their engagement. They're both very broken people that are going through a lot and have to learn how to process things and deal with things and learn how to communicate with each other, because when they ended the engagement, everything just kind of erupted and there was really no other choice for them but to walk away. It just wasn't working. But can you get through those problems? Can you learn to love each other through brokenness and accept each other kind of where you're at? Emily Henry really explores those themes and ideas. She also explores a lot of platonic friendships. There's kind of this group of girls and these group of guys that are a really close-knit group, but there's a lot of intricacies that go in there and nuances with every single relationship that's presented to us. And Emily Henry does not shy away from the conflict. She puts a lot of conflict in this book, a lot of hard conversations that these characters have to have in order to move on in a healthy way. And it was just enthralling for me. I was so invested in every single character, not just the two main characters, but the whole group of friends. I was invested in all of them as a group because it just felt like such a realistic situation of people that are going through things and they need to talk to their friends about it. And how can you be a support system in a community that is healthy and thriving? And I just thought it was so good. This is a prime example of a character book to me, and the reason why I loved it so much, because the plot is honestly barely there. It's like, Harry and Wynn have to pretend to be engaged with all their friends because nobody knows that they broke up. That's the plot, that's it. And then they kind of like figure their stuff out. It's really the focus on the characters and them growing and developing that makes this book so good to me. So it was the most surprising book this year by far. Okay, I had to throw these next two questions in here because I did an Overhyped series this fall and an Underhyped series this fall where I talked about a lot of books. I feel like I made some people kind of angry and I might make them a little bit angry again. Next question is, what is the most overhyped book you read this year? And I can't not say The 7-Year Slip. Once again, I'm going to preface though, I liked this book. This is a good book. It was enjoyable, but it is not as good as everybody is saying. This was hyped up as far as it could possibly be hyped up, honestly. My expectations were not even that they were that high, but I just kept seeing everybody say how much they loved this book. And I more went into it just with the question of, okay, what do they love about it? Why do they love this book so much? And at the end of it, it was just kind of lackluster, honestly. I thought that the characters were very two-dimensional. but also like kind of annoying towards the end, and just the way that they deal with stuff and the actual problems and conflicts that they were going through. I just didn't love it. I think that it was a whimsical book. It was a sweet and easy read. It's pretty short, and I like the idea of an apartment that travels through time and you slip 7 years into the past. That's great. That's fun. My personal opinion is that I just don't think it's as good as everybody is saying it is, and I didn't, love it. I liked it. I enjoyed myself. Didn't love it. And then naturally, we have to answer the question of, what is the most underhyped book that you read this year? I think it's The Book of Doors. Every time that I've talked about this book, I do have a lot of people in the comments that are saying how much they loved it as well and are really excited to see it getting talked about. But I still have not actually seen anybody else on YouTube talk about it and include it in a wrap up or give their review on it. So to me, this is still underhyped. It's still underhyped and it needs to be talked about more. This is such a good classic fantasy, good versus evil. It's thrilling. It's very action-packed. I think the world is really interesting. It's kind of urban fantasy. It still takes place in like New York City, I think, is our main setting, but all of the magical elements in the magic system, it takes place around books, and I love books about books, as I'm sure you have gathered at this point. It's just so good, and this is a debut novel. I almost put this as the best book in the debut novel, but I had to put it instead in the most underhyped book that I read because it just needs to be talked about more. Please read it if you like fantasy. Read it if you don't like fantasy. It still is enjoyable. It still is good. The plot is just so awesome. Love the characters, love the ensemble of characters, and it just kind of feels like a return to a classic form of fantasy. Like, there's not really a romance aspect of it. It's not like the romantasy that's very popular right now, but it's also not like the really thick Game of Thrones, super dense multi-series books. It's a standalone book with a cool magic system, awesome characters, and good versus evil plot. Love this book. Very underhyped. Next question is, what is the lowest rated book on Goodreads that you've read this year? This is a very justifying answer because the lowest rated book is Pumpkin Spice and Everything Nice. It is currently sitting at a 3.06. Not out of a ton of ratings, to be fair. There's only about 3,000 ratings for this one, but I still think that 3.06 is way too high for this book. Next question is, what is the highest rated book on Goodreads that you've read this year? And this is also a very justifying answer. It's The Will of the Many. This is currently sitting at a 4.62 out of 72,000 ratings, which I think is one of the highest rated books on Goodreads that I have seen. And like I said, definitely the highest that I've read. The craziest thing about these ratings though, and I think this is one of the main reasons that I actually ended up picking up this book, is because this is the highest ratio of 5 stars to 4-star reviews on Goodreads that I've ever seen. Out of the 72,000 people that have given a rating to this book, over 50,000 of them are 5 stars. The next tier for 4 stars is 17,000 ratings. That is crazy to me. I've never seen it split that large. If anything, most of the time I see more 4-star reviews than a 5-star review, even if it's very highly rated. That is so cool. I'm so happy about that. There's 254 1-star reviews for this. I need to read some of these real quick. This person says, oh my God, it just hit me. He's copying Sarah J. Maas's Crescent City, like exactly the same idea and conflict. What? I'm sorry, what? That's so funny. Somebody just said, no. This 1-star is, every dude who wants to write an epic saga about a lowly orphan with a secret past who goes on a quest to discover the truth and then hijinks ensue should be limited to a maximum of 400 pages. Any more than that is just gasbaggery. I obviously don't agree with any of these 1-star reviews, but that's funny. I kind of want to look into that more. We gotta move on though. Next question is, what is your new comfort book? That's gotta be the Hunan Dong Bookshop for me. The reason I feel like it's such a comfort book for me now is just because of my experience reading the book. I've talked about it before, but there's not a lot of plot that goes into this book. It's a very cozy, simple read. You're just kind of plopped down into a setting as a reader and you just experience the characters in their natural habitats. It's almost like you're watching in on these character vignettes and learning about them, learning about their past and how they've grown, their ambitions. And it's just so beautiful and sweet. In Korea, this is actually considered healing fiction. And honestly, I felt that. Every time I went to read this book, the vibe was just so comfortable and cozy, and I just had such a good experience reading it, which is why I talk about it so highly. Honestly, is not even totally because of what the book is, the writing style, the characters, the plot. It's really just because I had such a good experience reading it, and that's definitely personalized to me. Not everybody is going to have the same experience, but personally, it's so great. Such a comfort read. Highly recommend if you're looking for something like that. Next question is, did you reread any books this year? And I actually did. I reread 3 books that I have read in the past, and then there were none by Agatha Christie, which I ended up reading as part of a book club, and somebody else picked this book. It was great to reread it because I think the last time I had read it was maybe in high school. So this was so fun. I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. I haven't read a ton of her books, but I've definitely read a good chunk of her library. This is by far my favorite Agatha Christie book. It's so spooky and interesting and thrilling, and I just had such a great time rereading this book. The second book that I reread this year was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is also a book that I haven't read since high school, and I don't think I really liked it in high school, but this is my husband's favorite book, and he's been asking me to reread it for a really long time, so I finally did. Honestly, the only reason why I actually ended up rereading it was because the current book that I was reading at the time, I had accidentally left it at my grandma's house, and so I couldn't read in the morning that book that I wanted to, and I didn't want to start another big book and read 2 books at the same time, and so I was like, I could knock out The Great Gatsby in an hour or 2. I should just go ahead and read that. So I did, and I finished it really quickly. It was fun to revisit it. I kind of understand why I didn't really like it in high school that much. It definitely is not a character book. Nobody is very likable or enjoyable. I think the writing is very beautiful. I don't really connect to it on a very deep level. I recognize the importance and that it's such an icon, but it's just not my favorite classic. And then the last book that I reread was Beach Read by Emily Henry, and I specifically reread this because I was reading all of Emily Henry's books this year. I wanted to go back and reread Beach Read because I rated this 5 stars on my first read through like 4 or 5 years ago, and I still do really love it, but I wanted to be able to have it fresh in my mind as I was reading the other ones because I was just comparing them all, and that was really fun. So those are my rereads. Next question is, what was the most unique book that you read this year? And I think the most unique book that I read was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and the reason that it's so unique to me is honestly because I can't talk about it. Whoa. Yeah, I don't know how to talk about it. I don't feel like I was able to connect with the plot at all and what was going on, and Susanna Clarke has such a specific writing style. It's shrouded in so many metaphors and allegories, and it's very romantic and flowery writing. She never really says what she's actually meaning to say, but it's cool, and she's a great writer. It just was that type of writing style paired with a plot that really made no sense to me. But in the moment, I recognized how unique this was. I've never read a book like it. I probably won't ever read another book like it. I recognize that it is objectively very good. I know there's a lot of people out there that love this book. I'm just realizing that it really was not for me. I want to be able to talk about it with you guys, but I just couldn't get there, and that's on me. That's not on the book. It's on me for not fully understanding it. Next question is, what book are you most likely to reread? I can tell you it's going to be Abby Jimenez just for the summer, mostly because I've been really itching to reread it. I was very surprised by how much I liked this book. I'd only read one other Abby Jimenez book, which was Yours Truly, and it was okay. I did enjoy it. I liked it, but I didn't really feel a deep emotional connection to it. But I had seen so many people talking about how much they loved this book when it first came out, and so I just kind of wanted to try it, give it a shot. This was so good. This was so good. The characters were so good. The writing was so good. The story was so good, and I loved every second of it. It is an easy 5-star for me, and I'm already feeling like I really want to reread it. So this has to go in that category. Next is, what was the prettiest cover that you read this year? I'm gonna cheat a little bit because this is a special edition cover. It's not the original cover, and it's gonna be One Dark Window. I don't even love the original cover of One Dark Window, but this special edition cover is so pretty to me. I just think that the foiling is gorgeous. The stenciling on the edges is gorgeous. The pages themselves, there's a lot of illustrations on the inside too. It just feels such high quality. It really feels like the prettiest book and like the highest quality book that I own. And that may not be actual truth, but it's just so pretty and I just like to display it. So I gotta put that one at Prettiest cover. Okay, we're getting into some fun ones now. What was the longest book of the year that you read? This is the same as my mid-year check-in. It's still the longest book. I haven't read one that's longer since then. It's House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This book is 835 pages. It's not the longest book that I've ever read. I think the longest book I've ever read was Kingdom of Ash, which when you get that close to 1,000 pages, honestly, just make it 1,000 pages so that we can say we read a 1,000-page book. It's fine. This is 835 pages. I don't think it needed to be 835 pages. This was also a relatively disappointing book for me this year. I think it was for a lot of people. I still enjoyed it so much. I loved the characters and the experience, and even the plot was pretty good. It was fine. I think this just had a lot of issues and would have benefited from another couple rounds of editing. So this is the longest book that I read this year. Should it have been the longest book that I read this year? Maybe not, but it is what it is. And then what is the shortest book that you read this year? The shortest book I actually just finished a couple days ago, and it's Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Not including the acknowledgments and a note on the text, this is 114 pages of story. And honestly, the margins are really large and the font is really large. This is a short book. I think in my mid-year check-in, the shortest book that I had read was still over 200 pages. So this is like 50% of that. It took me like an hour and a half to read. And I actually wasn't planning on reading it when I did. I was reading a different Christmassy holiday rom-com book that I had just finished. It was kind of late at night and I was getting ready for bed, brushed my teeth, I washed my face, I was ready to go to sleep, but my husband was reading next to me and I kind of started to get a little bit of a second wind. So I was like, okay, I'll read Small Things Like These until I get tired, just a couple pages and then I'll go to bed. A couple pages turned into 114 pages, which means that I read the entire book that night. This is a really beautiful book. I know a lot of people hold it in very high regard. The thing that I can say about this book that is the coolest to me is that the subject matter really caused me to go and research a lot that was going on, and that was really fun. So after I finished it, I actually was on my phone a lot researching the subject matter, the topics, everything that they were discussing in this book is very fascinating, really sad, but also a part of history that I'm glad is being talked about in this book. And apparently there's a movie that just came out. I don't know if I want to see the movie because it seems like it would be really sad. Okay, next question is, what was the most disappointing book you read this year? Now, I'm clarifying that the most disappointing book is different than my least favorite book of the year. Most disappointing is going to relate to the book that I had very high expectations for and was very let down. An honorable mention would probably be House of Flame and Shadow, but not as extreme as this book, which is crazy. And that's gonna be Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I loved the first book in this duology, Divine Rivals. I thought that it was really beautifully written. The characters were so strong, the romance was so strong, the whole plot I was just very invested in. I think the world building was really awesome, and she set it up to have an epic conclusion to this duology. And Ruthless Vows crashed and burned so hard for me. My biggest complaint about this book is that it was just super messy. I think that Rebecca Ross in the first book set up all of these questions and all of these things that the reader is really excited to get an answer to in book 2. I just picture Rebecca Ross writing and then realizing that she has all these plot holes and unanswered questions, and then she's like, well, I gotta finish that up real quick, and then just very hastily writes an answer to something, and you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Or she brings in a lot of coincidences that's like, oh, by the way, this causes this to happen, which is an answer to this. And it's like last minute, it doesn't feel very thought out at all. The plot is messy. The relationship that I loved in the first book ended up just being really weird and not great. And I was so sad by how much I disliked this book. This was definitely the most disappointed that I've been in a book this year. Okay, next we've got, what was the best sequel that you read this year? And this was a little bit of a surprise to me, but I'm gonna say Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. This is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I really liked that first book, which I also read this year. It's definitely firmly in the cozy fantasy genre, which was really nice to just kind of go at your own pace and read through. The writing style is really fun because both of these books are not chapter-based, kind of traditionally so. It's actually like you're reading a diary entry from Emily herself, and that is very fun because Emily has a very unique unique and specific tone of voice that is used throughout the entire book. She's super logical, she's super literal as well, so a lot of things kind of go over her head in a funny way. And it was almost like the author was bringing the reader in on a secret. Like the reader is reading between the lines and they know what's going on, but Emily, the main character, doesn't because she's so literal. I loved that. That was such a fun experience. I liked this book more than the first book actually because it felt like the plot was meatier. It felt like more got accomplished. The stakes were higher. It still felt very cozy and sweet and easy to read, but it definitely had a lot more going on that was very exciting. And so this definitely feels like the best sequel that I read this year. Although I haven't even read a lot of sequels this year because I've been reading a ton of one-offs, which has been fun, but I'm kind of starting to feel that itch to get back into a series or a duology or something like that. We are really nearing the end right now. The next question is, what is a book that made you cry this year? A lot of books made me cry this year because I cry at most anything, but this is the book that made me cry the hardest, and it is the same answer as my mid-year check-in. It's gonna be My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Friedrich Backman. And if you've read this book, you know why I cry, and you can probably picture how intense it was. It was a lot. It was an ugly cry. It was a very ugly cry, and I went into this book super cocky. I was sure that I wasn't gonna cry, and it didn't work out. Next question is, what is your favorite quote from the year? Now, I am not somebody that annotates books. I don't even usually highlight or make a note of quotes that I love, but when I do, it really means that a quote has hit me hard. So it's a small pool to pull from, but this quote instantly came to mind. It's from The Ministry of Time. It's literally the last paragraph in The Ministry of Time. Also, speaking of books that made me cry, this sentence made me cry. The book itself deals with a lot of themes on forgiveness and hope, and the main character really goes on a journey of processing a lot of things from her past, and then the author just ends the book with this. Oh my gosh. It says, forgiveness, which takes you back to the person you were and lets you reset them. Hope, which exists in a future in which you are new. Forgiveness and hope are miracles. They let you change your life. They are time travel. I could cry just reading that again. Okay, now, sharp turn here. The moment you have all been waiting for, but also the moment you guys all probably expect. What was your least favorite book of the year? Yeah, see it? Yep. More importantly, what was your favorite book of the year? The Will of the Many. Obviously, I am obsessed with this book. Everybody knows I'm obsessed with this book. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about this book, so I won't talk about it anymore. Read The Will of the Many. Good golly, I beg of you. Wow. That is all, guys. That is my end of the year book tag. Thank you so much for joining and watching. It's been a really wild year. I have almost been on booktube for an entire year. It's about 11 months now, which is absolutely crazy to me. It's been such a wild ride and crazy journey, and I'm just feeling really grateful and thankful for you guys for subscribing to me and joining in on the comments and having fun conversations with me about books. It's so fun. I really, really mean it more than you could ever understand. It's just been a really fun year. So thank you so much once again for watching and hanging out with me in this corner of the internet. And have a Merry Christmas, everybody. Enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you real soon.